that. All right. Good morning. Welcome. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And I'm going to make sure we have the text here. I'm going to go back a little bit. There it is. Okay.
I found the answer.
What was the answer to what was the question?
The question was where did Midian come from?
Oh, yes. Okay.
Who did Midian come from? Keturah.
Okay. Very
So
cool.
yeah.
Very cool.
So that's a whole different kettle of fish.
Abraham. Wow.
Yeah. So yes.
Okay.
Yeah. All those guys are. That's you remembered the right people. You just
I thought it was. It wasn't.
couldn't attribute the right mom or dad or something.
Right.
What does that? I did not follow that.
Oh. Okay.
We were talking about Jethro's genealogy, and remember he lived in Midian, and so we assume he's a Midianite priest. So the question is, where did he come from? What was his genealogy? So that would actually take him all the way back then to Abraham. You all are familiar with the fact that Keturah and Hagar are one and the same according to tradition. That Abraham did not have three wives, okay? What happened was after Sarah passed, he took Hagar back, and she's called Keturah there. That's the tradition. All right, I think I'm ready to share the screen at this point.
Okay.
Why did she change her name, or why?
That's, of course, a very good question, and I have to confess, I do not recollect.
I don't know if anybody knows.
No, it's a very good fundamental kind of question.
Yeah.
I mean, these are questions. It begs the question: why is she called Keturah? And I would have to look and see. There may be, if I'm spelling it correctly, Lahaktir means like to offer up incense, and there might be something lovely about that. There may be some compliment to her in terms of that comparison, but I could be wrong. I really am wildly guessing.
Hagar was her slave name.
Hagar was actually a daughter of Pharaoh, I believe.
Yeah.
Right. He was Sarah's servant. Right, Sarah's servant. Yeah, right. I mean, you could go in that direction too and say, well, it was to remove that sort of servitude element of it. Right. I mean, that whole subject is an interesting subject, and it begs a lot of questions, right?
For another day.
Yeah, oh, definitely. So let's go into here, since we've made a bracha, and here we go. So this is where he was naming Eliezer, his son, Moses' son Eliezer, because God had saved him, had helped him, been his aid, and saved him from the Pharaoh's sword. Vatzileni mecherev paro, and we're going to look at, I'm going to slip into my, follow my temptations and go for the Torah T'mima here. So he saved me from Pharaoh's sword. Amar Rabbi Elazar, said Rabbi Elazar, B'sha'ah shetafas paro et Moshe. At the time when Pharaoh captured Moses, Chayavo lahatiz et rosho. He held him guilty of capital punishment to remove his head. He wanted to have him decapitated. Nitaz acherev metzal tzavaro shel Moshe, but the sword came off, it bounced off the neck of Moses, al tzavaro shel kasantiro v'hargo, and it went and it fell on the neck of the executioner and killed him. Husha Amar Moshe. This is the implication of what Moses was saying when he said, "Vayatzileni mecherev paro," and he rescued me, he saved me from Pharaoh's sword. So vayatzileni. So there's a diuk, an emphasis on saved me from Pharaoh's sword, me as opposed to the executioner. Or T, Hitzil, the Kasentar, or Kasentar Harag. He saved me, but he killed the executioner. Let's take a look at Hay. Drashazo, this interpretation, he behemshech midrasha, make sure I got the right place. Okay. Shuhuv'a la'el beperik shmot. This is an addition to a interpretation that was brought above in Parshat Shmot, in Exodus. We didn't read it, but apparently there's additional stuff that's said there. Oh, on the verse that says, Vayivrach Moshe mipnei Paro. This is the verse. Moses fled from Pharaoh's presence. Ka'asher harag et hamitzri, after he had killed the Egyptian. Remember, we talked about this when we talked about when we talked about Datan and Abiram, the two Israelites that were fighting where Moses intervened. Uparich Yerushalmi, and in the Yerushalmi, in the Talmud Yerushalmi, they raise an objection. V'chi efshar levasar vadam lichbroach mipi hamalchut kesheshomarto. Is it possible for a mortal human, in other words, flesh and blood literally means a mortal, to escape from the sovereignty when they are guarding him? Is it possible for someone to escape the government, right? Umashni, and there they explain, she'afal pi nes barach, that the way he was able to escape was by means of a miracle. Sheneherag hakasantar, because the executioner was killed. And he explains this word kasantar, which would appear to be either Latin or Greek. Hu hamizuman laharog et chayve mita. This is the person that is appointed to kill, to execute those who have been sentenced to capital punishment. Va'al yedei chen, and it was only through this way, matzah makom livroach, he was able to find an opportunity to escape. So just, I guess, a thought that occurs to me as we read this is how engaged the rabbis are, the students of Torah are, to visualize to themselves and to ask penetrating questions and to try and bring the Torah alive, the narrative of the Torah alive through these kinds of explanations. That's the thing that sort of jumps out at me about this. And of course, there may be more to it. I mean, there's such a penetrating literary analysis of these verses. Here we go. So there's another interpretation, which I really did want you to hear, and is a very important point. It's out there. Vayatzileni mecherev paro, and he saved me, he rescued me from Pharaoh's sword. Here we go. Vayatzileni mi paro ein ketiv kan. It doesn't say he rescued me from Pharaoh. That would have been an alternative. It isn't. That's not what's written here. Ela mecherev paro, but literally from the sword of Pharaoh. So, in other words, what they're saying with that observation, and by the way, you've noticed possibly already that is a standard way of sort of sifting through the text of the written text of the Torah and saying, wait a second, why is it saying it this way? Why isn't it saying it some other way? So what, and then it's a springboard then to try and focus on what special piece of information is being conveyed here by the specific wording of the Torah. So here's, I think, a lovely drush. Melamed, this teaches she'afilu cherev chada netuna al tzavara, that even if a sharp sword is placed on his neck, meaning one's neck, shel adam, of a person, HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilo, it is possible for the Holy One, blessed be He, to rescue him. So basically what's it saying is, don't give up hope. Don't give up hope. You know, your faith, it's quite possible that your faith will see you through. And besides which, okay, we'll take a look, first of all, before I make any further comments, let's take a look at what Baruch Halevi Epstein says here. Nir'eh, it appears, de ma'amar zeh mechuvan lema shekatav katuv b'Bavli, that this particular statement, this particular thought, is directed to what is said in the Babylonian Talmud, in Brachot, in Tractate Brachot 10a. Here's what it says there. Afilu cherev chadam munachat al savaro shel adam. Even if a sharp sword is resting on the neck of a person, al yimna atzmo, he shouldn't prevent himself. He shouldn't consider himself outside min harachamim, from mercy. You just never know. V'yein b'rasha mekudemet, and he simply says, and just check the previous interpretation that he just gave. So, just thought it was something to give us encouragement and hope, etc.
Well, we don't actually have a moment in the Torah, do we, when Paro is threatening Moshe's life, right?
I
Do
think
we? I mean,
okay, the only place where it even approaches that is where he says, if you come to me another time, basically, you know, you're gonna be done for. I believe there's a verse at some point he says, you know, you're not gonna be around, you know. I think after the ninth plague?
Well, I mean, in verse 4,
yes.
and it says, and one who was named Eliezer,
Mhm.
because Moses said, the God of my father came to my aid and rescued me from Pharaoh's sword.
Right. And we know that Pharaoh was trying to catch him, right? That all we say is, you know, Moses says, aha, you know, the matter is known. So there must be some Midrash
right,
that
exactly.
Pharaoh was actually able to capture him.
Yeah, we don't actually get the story in the Tanakh, but the Midrash is filling it in and saying,
Right.
yep,
Yeah, the one
caught.
about the Tan and Abiram.
Right.
He was jailed, he was sentenced to death.
Right.
But you know, that's from the Midrash.
Yes,
So-
correct. So, you know, that sort of raises another sort of issue, because you know, I try not to use the phrase, oh, that's a Midrash, right? And somehow undermining the validity of the interpretation in some kind of.
Oh, no, I didn't mean it that way.
No, Sherabeth, I'm not accusing you of anything here. I'm making I want to make another point, okay? Because that is something that I would have done when I was just getting into this, right? Before I realized and recognized the power and legitimacy of the Midrash and these interpretations. And maybe I can get off a little bit by saying that the way I came to this was, just to try and make this as short as I can, is that at some point, let's say around when I was about 13 or 14, I discovered that by reading 5 chapters a day of the Bible in English, I could get through the entire opus, okay? And so it took a year, several years perhaps, to get through it at that rate, but I kept going at it. And what I did was, I don't know why necessarily, I thank God, I literally thank God, I did that. And I'd get up in the morning and I'd take 15 minutes of my day and I would read 5 chapters of the Bible, from Bereshit all the way through to Divrei Hayamim. And of course, I didn't understand a lot, certainly still don't understand a lot. But when I finished, I read it again and I read it again. And I must have gone through the Bible a few times. And so I became somewhat familiar, obviously, with the Bible. I then just sort of fast forward to seminary when I went to HUC, and we had this wonderful class on the Farshim, you know, on what we're doing right now with Rashi, etc., and the other great commentaries. We had a volume called Mikraot Gedolot, which is the Bible with various commentaries on the page. And inevitably, because I had not had much experience with this, I would come across a commentary and say, that's not right. How could they be saying that? And then I'd keep reading the biblical text, and then I'd say, oh my gosh, they know exactly what they're talking about. But beyond that, okay, going beyond that now into Midrashim and Midrash, etc. You know, how did this all come together, right? My theory would be that quite possibly, you know, the origins of the Bible are oral, that initially it wasn't written down immediately, and that the traditional understanding is that Moses wrote the Torah. He was God's secretary and wrote down, God dictated word for word the words of the Torah to Moses, and Moses faithfully wrote them down. I don't think we need to be stuck into an over literal understanding of that, because what I think it's trying to convey is the care and the thought that went into this ultimate book that we have in front of us, that we actually have, and to understand the value of every expression and to approach it in a way of that as if, you might say, God had dictated every word to Moses. And that's sort of that's going to help us approach this with tremendous care and tremendous thought and a lot of energy, et cetera, et cetera. Now, can I just finish? Okay.
Okay.
So these midrashim that we have, they did not become part of the text itself. But I suspect there were traditions that were there as part of this whole, you know, if you sort of stand back a little bit, all right, or stand back a lot and try to sort of get a perspective on this whole thing this whole enterprise that we're involved in, right? That these midrashim come to supplement and understand the creative process that gives us this biblical text. All right, I think I've said enough for now, and I welcome your comments.
I just wanted to add to what you were saying about Midrash, because I think in a lot of modern Torah study classes, people have no boundaries. It's kind of like anything goes Midrash. If somebody comes up with an opinion, it's equally valid because it's their opinion. But I think there's a difference between the traditional Midrash that we're learning here, where these people are really steeped in, you know, understanding of the text and traditional interpretation and kind of learning from each other and sharing, you know, an idea that's related to the structure of what is, you know, the Torah is presenting, as opposed to just sort of a modern point of view that is completely removed from the text. You know, it says, well, in these days we think this and this and this, so I think this interpretation would go nicely here, and that's just kind of boundaryless, and I don't like that kind of Torah study, because I don't learn anything. I can have, you know, social discussions and, you know, with anybody, but I don't think that, you know, it all fits nicely into Torah study. It's some, you know, I'm not saying there's never a place for that, but I don't like that kind of boundaryless Torah study.
I agree, Lauren. I do agree with you entirely. I feel the same way. I feel that this is anchored, and I feel those kinds of discussions generally fail to really have a sense of the original. They generally, as you said, don't show necessarily a great deal of scholarship. And I love the sense in which these kinds of things, actually, if I don't understand them or if I'm having trouble with them, I feel the onus is on me to try and understand what are they trying, you know, to make sense of it, rather than to impose my values, my worldview, etc., or my, you know, my modern approach. I'm not saying there's no value to it. For those people who love it, God bless them. To me, it doesn't bring me closer to the real enterprise. And I'm sorry, I know somebody else wanted to say something, and
Yeah.
I'm going to
It's
stop.
Oh.
Yeah, go
It's
ahead.
Yeah. What I appreciate about this is that when you make this statement of seeing it through a lens,
Mhm.
and you are the rabbi who is teaching, first of all, it has respect from you even saying, let's look at it through this lens, because we are looking for a teaching, not an explanation of what it means to you. Thank you, Lauren. I love that. Because that's not what we're here for. We are here to see it through a lens, not to be, it's not just open for all ages of interpretation. It's open to this historical treasure of ours. And if we don't look at it through a certain lens, then we're going to be led astray, and then just follow whatever somebody who wants to interpret it now. That's not the purpose of our study. And you make it very clear that we are focusing, that we're paying attention, and that we're not straying. I don't
Right.
know if I made myself clear, but thank you very much for
No,
listening.
no. Okay, listen, Lisa, you are summarizing, in a sense, exactly what Rashi was trying to do. Even in Rashi's time, I mean, look, we know there's certain classical, what you might call Christian interpretations, because the Christian tradition also holds these words as sacred, okay? They hold them sacred in a different kind of way, but nevertheless, they do hold them sacred. They do consider it scripture. And Rashi this is a theory that I have, that what caused Rashi to do what he did was his concern that people they were hearing Christian interpretations, and they were ignorant of the wealth of our own tradition. And so what Rashi was trying to do was to bring it into a way in which people could access this wealth of our own tradition and be able to debate, if necessary, people who are trying to find Christological references in the Torah or in the Bible.
Oh, it just came to me. It's not depending on other people's like translating this into a language. It's about drawing ourselves close to the Hebrew letters, the Hebrew words, and to study that text instead of what somebody else has translated.
Mhm. Mhm.
I want to hear what Golda's been trying to say for the last 10 minutes.
It's okay. Well, it evolved after listening to everybody.
I would
It's
think-
time travel. It's the ultimate time travel.
Yes.
We are seeing
Oh, I see what you're saying.
these times, but we cannot interact. I mean, we can interact with each other, but we can't interact with them. So we can't change time. Time is that's exactly what it was at that moment, at that time. And what Rashi saw, and what Epstein saw, and what everybody else sees by looking at what they're looking at. So that's what I love about Talmud. Just looking at all the different commentaries and stuff like that about in Talmud, that we're seeing a conversation in their time period. So we can't put our own stuff on it in this text, in this context, because we
can I-
can't. Yeah.
Okay. So what I do want to say is there's a lovely metaphor, you might call it, that says that when we read Rashi's lips move in the grave, because we are nevertheless encountering, and nobody's going to, I mean, look, even nowadays, to say that we can communicate perfectly with one another, even though we're all alive, isn't the case. Communication is terribly complex, is terribly layered, filtered, colored, etc., etc., and it's an approximation. But there is such a thing as a better approximation or a closer approximation than one that is just sort of totally dependent on one's own subjective, experiences, thought processes, etc. And the truth is, we can reach out, and And in a way, we are. Rashi is part of our conversation. Baruch Halevi Epstein is part of our conversation.
Yeah,
And
and you people
so,
will,
and,
with
and
the
I go with your first statement that in a way, this is ultimate time travel. This is time travel because we are engaging with the biblical text. We're engaging with Rashi. We're engaging with Baruch Halevi Epstein, etc. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just was going to interject that when we quote Rashi, we don't say Rashi said, we say Rashi says. Let's check and see what Rashi says. So he's
All right.
kind of moving towards us,
He's current,
well, us
yeah.
moving towards him.
Right. I mean, he certainly is trying to communicate to us. Otherwise, why did he write it down? You know, that's the beauty of writing, is that it added a layer of immortality to human experience. So lovely. What a gift, right? Let's
go back in time.
But again, it has to do with the approach, right? I mean, what we're talking about, you know, is sort of theory, and certainly I owe it to anyone I'm teaching, you know, to be able to explain the point of view and the methodology that I'm trying to use in doing what I'm doing, just like any, I would say, responsible historian, you know, it will explain before they start writing, they will explain the methodology that they're using by which they're filtering out the historical narrative or interpretation that they're giving. One has to do that. You just, you know, at least in trying to approximate the truth as much as possible. So, all right, onward we go. I'm trying to think, how far did we get in the actual scriptural text? Did we got to the last Eliezer, right? That was the last little piece.
We're on verse 5, I think.
Exactly, right. Vayavo Yitro Choten Moshe Uvanav. Okay, so here's so Jethro came, that is Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came, Uvanav ve'ishto, with his sons, that is with Moses' sons and his wife, El Moshe, to Moses, El Hamidbar, to the wilderness, Asher hu chonesham, where he was encamped, Har HaElohim, at the mountain of God, literally. By the way, if you remember the map I showed you yesterday, that still would have been an interesting journey. It wasn't, 20 minutes away. So Jethro made made an effort to come and bring Moses, his wife, and his sons. So El Hamidbar, to the wilderness. Af anu yodim. So we know, again, back to this sort of, why is it being stated? Why is the Torah telling us this? We too know Shebamidbar Haya, that Moses was in the wilderness. I mean, were you thinking that, we don't think he was in Timbuktu, right? We know that's where they headed. It's right on the other side of the Red Sea. Ella, but. So why is the Torah telling us this? B'shivcho shel Yitro diber hakatuv. Scripture is speaking in praise of Jethro. Shahaya Yoshev Bichodo Shel Olam, because he was sitting like king of the world. He was, back home. He was comfortable and honored and all this. Undedavo libo, but his heart compelled him, made him desire Latset El Hamidbar, to go out to the wilderness, Makom Tohu, a desolate place, Lishmoa Divrei Torah, to hear words of Torah. And of course, there's a message that we're getting here about the value of the words of Torah. And of course, again, the idea that Yitro was a priest of Midian. He was not an Israelite. He did not believe solely in Hashem. We read this elsewhere. He believed in many gods, and he was a polytheist. And yet something tells him, I've got to get out there. I'm willing to lay off all the pleasures of the world because this is what's really important. And sadly, it is almost, how can I put it? It seems almost prosaic to say it. But the truth is that when they say the Torah is the best merchandise, they are not kidding. They are not kidding. It isn't just a trite statement. I see I have some chat, so I'll take a quick look. Right.
I
Okay.
just wanted to add that they might have changed the order. Remember, we talked about changing the order of the stories.
Yes.
It could be that because of this view of Yitro,
Mm.
like an individual comes into the desert to get the Torah, so that precedes the multitude that comes into the desert to get the Torah. So he's like an intro. Yitro is an intro
Mm.
to the story of receiving the Torah.
So that's if you hold that Yitro comes before. On the other hand, this particular comment makes more sense in a way if Yitro is coming after the Torah has been given. In other words, he's heard about the Ten Commandments, he's heard about all of that. The other piece is, I think there is some statement, this is my memory, sort of from my memory, that in a way you have to, the reason why the Torah is given in the Midbar is because you have to be like a midbar to receive the Torah. If you are totally engaged in worldly, material pleasures, it is going to be hard for you.
That's so cool. That's true for us. Yeah, I see what, yeah. Also, the more we have a vacuum to receive it, the more we can receive.
Correct. You have to have the space, right? It's like we've got a limited amount of space. If you fill the space with other things, well, you'll have less space for this.
Right. I just want to also point out that when on Monday morning, when we read the Torah portion in the morning service, that Jeremy Bueller pointed out that I think it's 8 times or something that it says father-in-law, that it keeps reintroducing him as father-in-law, even though we already know that.
That's right.
And so there's obviously some significance to that, maybe just, how much they respect him or something, but it's interesting that it happens.
You're on the right lines. Okay, you're absolutely on the right lines, and I think Rashi even mentions it, right? That it's in a way it's in praise of Moses. I don't know if I mentioned it in this class, but it's, for example, up in Santa Rosa, Sarah is Rabbi Miller's daughter, but down here in Los Altos, I'm Sarah's father. And what it's doing is saying, here is this Midianite priest, right, who has this close relationship. He's Mishpacha of Moses. And who you're related to is significant. I mean, Lauren, the fact that your dad, had the, it's something that's very beautiful that they named a federal building after your father and that you're his daughter. And it counts for a lot because we're so influenced by family in ways that we aren't even aware, and admittedly positively and negatively, but it's profound. And it's saying that Jethro, and maybe Jethro as an example of someone who's a rank outsider in a way, nevertheless has a relationship to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, Moses, who transmitted the Torah to us. So it means that, nobody's excluded. You don't have to be, have to have a great pedigree in order to be able to relate to the Torah and to receive honor from it, to be honored by studying it, etc. This is, this is sort of pushing and fanning out the implications of such statements. If somebody else would like to say a comment before I stop the recording.
I do.
Please.
I want to say one thing that you said is that we have just so much space, to remember things or to, receive things, think about things. And that just comes to the heart of what I have tried to explain about what and why I remember certain things and why I don't, because I'm holding hundreds of songs, as well as the space to create more.
Mm-hmm.
And so I haven't chosen to do certain things that many people do or think about, such as TV, shows like Downton Abbey, which I didn't quite get away from, but you know what I'm talking about
Yeah.
me. Yeah, thank you. It really helped.
Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to stop the recording here.